Thanks everyone for joining. I think others will be joining as we go on here. But welcome to the public square. If this is your first time joining us, a special welcome. Basically, what the public square is it's we get together and we have a conversation.
Hi, the last night in Hawaii. Which gives Del.
Sorry about that. Yeah, we get together and we have a conversation about a civics topic. And today you can see what we'll be talking about, our latest policy brief from the Sandra Day O'Connor Institute. Why are teachers uncomfortable teaching civics? I'm Liam Julian. I'm the Vice President of Programs and Policy for the O'Connor Institute. And I tend to just basically facilitate these conversations, but it's really you all who I think lead it. I'm just kind of here to sort of guide it and as needed. A few things about the O'Connor Institute. We're a nonpartisan institute founded by Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. We have three pillars: civil discourse, civic education, and civic engagement. And I want to come back to that first one, civil discourse, because that's very important to us. So when we do have these conversations, while everyone should feel free to express their opinions and to disagree, Justice O'Connor was thought it was quite important, as do we, that we disagree without being disagreeable. So that's something that is very important to us. So I'd ask that we do that today, and I know we will. So let's get into it. Just a little bit of an overview about what we're talking about. The policy brief is called "Why Do Teachers Feel Uncomfortable Teaching Civics?" And you can find it at o'connorinstitute.org/research 2025. And I think maybe we can put that in the chat for you if you're interested. But the big findings of this report, what was really shocking is that, we hear a lot about how civics education in this country has been in decline, and a lot of students don't even have access to a civics class. But what we discovered is that even when students are in a civics class, they may not really be getting a very robust civics education because their teachers feel very uncomfortable teaching civics. And there are three broad reasons for that. Well, I'll say there are three broad sort of buckets into which we can sort of classify the reasons for that. The first one is sort of a lack of preparation. Civics teachers tell us in our survey, they told us that really when they were learning, how to be a teacher in ed schools, that by and large they didn't get the sort of civics content that they were going to need. And they also didn't get what's called the civic sort of the pedagogical skills. That is how to lead a classroom conversation about really sort of tough topics or sensitive topics. What do you do if somebody in class gets upset, et cetera? They just don't feel like they've been prepared to navigate that. The second sort of bucket is a lack of guidance about what to teach. So what is civics? What are they allowed to teach in their classrooms? What should they definitely cover? What should they maybe not cover? And how should they talk about it? Especially today in our sort of polarized environment, that's a big concern. And then the last bucket is, a lack of support. Teachers very broadly told us that they felt that were something to go awry in their classroom, were a person to get upset, a student, were a parent to sort of call the principal's office, that the teacher would not be supported, even if they had done, everything sort of that they thought was the right way to do things. They would not be supported by their principals, by their district leaders. So that's kind of the broad overview. And of course, the issue here is that if civics teachers themselves don't feel comfortable teaching civics, it's tough for us to expect that students are going to be able to learn civics. So that's obviously sort of the big kind of tension. So I'll open it up now. What we'll do is if you want to contribute, just go to the bottom there and you'll see the React. Some of you may have a button that says raise hand, but if you don't see that, if you go to the bottom and you see where React is, if you click on React, it should give you the option to raise your electronic hand. And if you do that, then I'll see you and then I can call on you. But really interested to hear sort of any sort of broad reactions to that. What has your experience been? Are you a parent? Are you a teacher? Are you a former educator? Did you read the report and do you think it's all garbage? I wrote it, so come at me. So go ahead and raise your hands and we'll jump right in. And one thing I will say is that if you do go to the report, um, some of the data are actually pretty astonishing. I had a feeling when we did this that we would find that teachers were sort of feeling this way. I did not in any way realize that it was going to be to the extent. Have you ever self-censored or avoided certain topics due to fear of pushback or controversy? Almost 80% of the teachers we surveyed said yes. So go ahead, Chris.
Hi, Liam. Chris Morales, a financial professional, and I've taught on a volunteer basis in schools for many years. I'm curious as to in America, when did we stop the teaching of civics? I graduated from grammar school in the 1960s, and I know it was taught to my brothers, my older brothers, but not to me. When did we stop doing that?
Thanks, Chris. Great question. You graduated in the 1960s?
Yeah, I was graduated, I guess, about 1970 from grammar school.
Yeah, it was the 60s. Um, I'm making a joke there, but that's true. We last year we put out a report called "When and Why Did America Stop Teaching Civics?" And we found that the 1960s were the big sort of shift. This was a point in time when civics first started to become controversial, let's say. This was a point in time when there began to be debates in this country about what civics education should look like. Prior to that, as you can imagine, especially in the after World War II, and in the early 20th century, there was sort of a broad agreement about what civics education should look like. But it was in the 60s that the sort of controversy around that started to arise. And what we started to see at that time is that that's when schools started to walk away from it. And this is something that we found even in the report we're talking about today. When civics is very controversial, schools and teachers begin to sort of teach it less for understandable reasons. It also got pushed out of the curriculum for a lot of other sort of priorities. STEM started to become a priority. With the Russians and Sputnik and all of this, this was sort of the start to think we need more math, we need more science, and civics kind of got pushed out a little bit. Civics has also got sort of encompassed under the broad label of social studies.
Yes.
And then that was a way to sort of try to bring the controversy down. But really, what it meant was that we weren't teaching sort of the robust civics. I mean, if you were in high school in this country in the 1950s, it was highly unlikely that you would have any less than three civics courses, a semester each. Pretty much every high school student had the same sort of three courses. The culminating course in your senior year would be a course called Problems of Democracy, when you were really wrestling with what it meant to be in a democracy versus other types of government. I mean, it was a really robust civics education, and that started to go away in the 60s, as you noted, Chris. And then with No Child Left Behind, that was really No Child Left Behind. If you guys will remember, this was a federal education law in the early 2000s, I think 2001, that tied federal funding for schools to student test scores in math and reading. And so, what the unintended consequence here is that other subjects that weren't math and reading really got pushed out of the curriculum as schools loaded up in those areas. But now I think we're starting to see civics come back a little bit. If you take a look around the country and sort of see things that are happening at the state level, people are starting, I think, to realize that we've gone too long without teaching this thing, without investing in it. And so I hope that answers your question.
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much, Liam.
You're welcome, Chris. Um, let's see. I'm looking in the chat. Some people are in the chat. Are there clear current examples of where civics is being taught according to principles and practices that are measured to be successful based on standard success metrics? One thing that's a great question from Sean in the chat. One thing that is difficult, right, about teaching civics as opposed to teaching math is that unlike algebra or geometry, a civics curriculum it can change from place to place, what it actually is being taught. And that makes it hard to sort of test sometimes. And we haven't really seen a lot of really good sort of robust data around civics testing. The data that we do have from the National Assessment of Educational Progress is showing those scores are sort of declining at this point. But to Sean's question, do we have any examples of where civics is being taught well? I always come back to the AP, that is Advanced Placement, U.S. Government and Politics course. And I'm a little bit biased because I used to work for the AP program and I helped work on this course. But this is a course that I think does a very good job of setting out what a really robust civics curriculum can and should be. And also a course that has gotten buy-in from people on the left and people on the right. And you can get credit for this course at universities that are on the left, like, I don't know, Oberlin, Wesleyan. You can get credit for it at universities on the right, like Liberty University. So they found a way to do it. I would encourage people to check out that curriculum at AP, the U.S. Government and Politics course. Now, this is a college level course, but I still think that that course can be a model for how to teach civics, even to students who may not yet be at that sort of college level. But I hope that maybe answers your question a little bit, Sean. All right, anyone else have anything they'd like to share? I see another in the chat. Oh, Marty, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to know, is there a way that we can support our teachers, and do we have a program in civics that you can offer them?
Great question, Marty. Yeah, the O'Connor Institute has several programs that can be supplementary for civics teachers in the classroom, and then we also offer a number of sort of extracurricular programs for students. We have something called the O'Connor Institute Ambassadors Speech and Debate Club for high school students. And essentially, we get together in a format like this. These are students from all over the country, and they get together like we're doing right now, and I moderate the conversation. And we talk about civics. And a lot of these students tell us, Marty, that it's the one place where they feel that they can actually have these conversations in a sort of what they like to call safe space. I gather from them that they don't feel in their class that, just as the teachers are uncomfortable teaching civics, I gather that a lot of students are actually uncomfortable having those sort of conversations in their class because they're worried about what their classmates may or may not say or how they will feel. And we plan to do more research on this in the coming months about how students are actually sort of dealing with this in civics classes. How can we support teachers? That's a really great question. I think it probably comes down to a few things. You can make sure that your teachers know that you support them, and also make sure that the leaders at the school and district level know that you believe, and maybe I'll put words in your mouth here, Marty, so correct me if I'm wrong, but that you believe that teachers should be able to teach a robust version of civics in class if it's done in a responsible way. And those teachers would tell us that what they're lacking from their school and district leaders is both support, but also guidance on what they should be teaching in class. You know, you have a teacher in a civics class who today reads the news and thinks, how do I teach this? And they need guidance. So a good thing to do would be to let those school and district leaders know that that's something that you think teachers need and deserve. Great question. Yeah. All right. Elizabeth is in the chat and asks, how can teachers discuss controversial topics in this polarized environment? Great question, Elizabeth. One of the things, this report wasn't all doom and gloom. One of the things that we tried to do was actually ask these teachers that we surveyed, how are you able to do it? Like in this environment, with all the discomfort you feel, how do you still teach civics in your class? What are some of the techniques you use? And one of the things that we heard from teachers, and it was kind of interesting how many teachers we heard this from, is that if you ground your civics lessons in primary documents, if you ground it in those sort of core documents from hundreds of years ago, this is a great strategy to accomplish several things. Number one, it just takes the temperature way down in your class. So you're not necessarily having a discussion or a debate about something that happened in the news yesterday, But you're talking about the broader conversation, the broader sort of disagreement on this topic that we've been having for hundreds of years. So it takes the temperature down. But I think also it allows students to understand implicitly that, hey, disagreeing is something that we do in this country. Uh, Productive disagreement that leads to compromise is how we got to where we are today. And teachers said that that can be very effective. It's sort of an implicit lesson to students that they're not the only ones disagreeing, that we've been disagreeing for hundreds of years. So that can be an effective way to discuss controversial topics in class. Another interesting thing that we found in the report was the preparation piece, which I sort of mentioned. Something to keep in mind is that a lot of the teachers who are teaching civics today are millennials, for example. Okay, based on what we just talked about with Chris, they themselves did not, in many cases, have anything close to a robust civics education when they were in school. And then they go to college and they go to ed school, and they're still not getting that sort of civics content, even the social studies teachers. And so a lot of them end up in a civics class and basically don't have a civics background at all. So that's another issue that we really need to think about teacher preparation. I'd be interested to hear if any of you had any ideas about that, because that's a big deal. Something in the chat here from Azra. Is it true that some teachers fear being judged for their opinions when teaching civics? That's a great question, Azra. And yes, what we found from the group that we surveyed was that without exception, these teachers did not want their opinions to be impacting students in their classroom. What they wanted was to sort of be able to facilitate students to think through these ideas, to think through sort of the best arguments on either side, and to come to their own opinions. The problem is that they don't know where the lines are. And they're not exactly sure, Azra, what they can and can't say. They're worried that something that they do say may be construed by a student, by a parent, as advocacy in one way or another. And some of them, quite frankly, told us they're not really sure if what they are saying is advocacy today. They just don't understand exactly. Nobody has given them sort of the guidelines. I mean, we've all had jobs, right? And we know that one of the ways that you're successful in a job is that there's clear expectations for you. You know what your boss expects. You know what your job is. You know what you can and can't do. And when that doesn't exist, it makes it difficult to do your job well. And that's sort of what we're hearing from teachers, Azra. Okay. Good questions. Good questions, Azra. That was great. Back to what I was saying about teacher preparation. This was really a stunning finding that we came up with here. And this has been replicated by other research organizations. Among social studies teachers, it's only 1 in 5 that actually feels really prepared to teach civics. So think about that. This is social studies teachers. So that means that 4 out of 5, 80%, say, just don't have the preparation I need. It's a really tricky topic. Okay, Constantine, how can you address the issue of race in civics? So this is so important, right? Goes back to what we're talking about. How when we have to talk, civics is not like geometry. I mean, maybe geometry was very controversial a few thousand years ago when they were kind of like figuring it out. It's not so much today, right? Civics still is. And so how we talk about controversial topics or touchy topics, like, as you say, Constantine, race, is so important because we have to have hard conversations at the school leader, at the legislative level, to figure out how we can do that. What's happening, right, is that those conversations are not occurring. And this is all kind of trickling down to the teacher. And so because there's no agreement at the legislative level, there's no agreement sort of at the district level, the school leaders sort of aren't kind of dealing with this, that it falls on the teacher. And the teacher gets a question in class about race. Okay, what can the teacher say? How does this teacher deal with that topic Constantine, what we're finding is that there's a trend where the teacher is just simply saying, we're not going to talk about that. I would argue that that makes for a far less effective civics education. But that's unfortunately what's happening. So if we're going to talk about issues like race, if we're going to talk about issues that are touchy, which civics does, that is civics. Then we have to, at those sort of higher levels, come to agreement about how those topics are addressed. But great question, Constantine. Could today's high school, this is from Kay in the chat. You guys love the chat. I get it. Could today's high school student pass the test that immigrants take to become citizens? It's a really good question, Kay. There are some states, Arizona is one of them, where passage of effectively the test that immigrants take to become citizens is required for high school graduation. The pass score is not necessarily what maybe you or I think of as a passing score, but nonetheless it's there. But to your question, Kay, the latest data, federal data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, call into question whether today's high school students could pass that test. Those scores are dropping, and you can see it too. There's a lot of organizations that put out the Annenberg study comes out every year, and inevitably shows some really stunning percentage of students couldn't name the three branches of government, et cetera, et cetera. So I think your question is a good one, and I think that the data we have suggests that maybe a significant portion of high school students could not pass that test. Chris, is there a legitimate reluctance for a school district to begin the teaching of civics when the lines of division are being blurred by the current administration? Legitimate to begin teaching civics, lines of division. I'm not sure what you mean, Chris. I can see you. You want to jump in and tell me what you're talking about, lines of division being blurred?
Yeah, well, I was referring to the fact that the current administration is doing things that are unprecedented, like going after universities and news organizations and extracting settlements for them in exchange for cooperation. So I think there's an environment where people feel like the past is no longer prologue for where borders are and where safety lines are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, certainly, regardless of where you fall politically, I think we'd all agree that what's happening now is that things are changing. Things are changing pretty rapidly. Then there's a lot of disagreement about where those lines are. And to your point, Chris, that's what we're hearing from teachers. It's what I was saying earlier, where they wake up and read the newspaper, and they say, "How do I teach this?" If a student is asking about a division of, powers, for example, and this is a question that the Supreme Court is weighing. How do we ask a high school teacher to sort of explain that? So it is very difficult, as you point, Chris, today, especially because things are changing rather rapidly, because what we are seeing a significant amount of polarization and disagreement about where those lines are. It's just so important for teachers, though, that somebody tell them what's expected, so that they can within those boundaries teach a robust and responsible sort of version of civics. And because nobody's telling them that, we're seeing a watering down generally of civics instruction, and that's showing up in the scores of students. I would argue that it's very difficult to expect a student to remember data like how the government is structured and what is the Third Amendment and things like that if their civics class is just, dry as a desert. If they're not having the conversations that take those facts and put them into the sort of applicable context, where they're having those sort of robust discussions and debates. Because otherwise, you're just memorizing stuff without context to it. It just lacks any sort of importance in your life. And I would argue that is showing up in the test scores that we can see. So really good question there. Um, yeah. All right. What else in this report? This was really you can check out too. It's interesting. I think the report hit some sort of a nerve because we did get a lot of press coverage for it throughout the country. You can see it on our on the page that I referenced earlier, o'connorinstitute.org/research 2025. Really wide press coverage throughout the country, which I think kind of gets back to a point about our survey. These teachers that we talked to did not come from one part of the country. This was a national sample. So they came from red states, they came from blue states, they came from all over. So what we're talking about here, people have asked this question before, is this primarily a sort of something happening in blue states or red states? Where is this censorship taking place? Where do teachers feel uncomfortable? It's all over, is what we've found. It's a very, very broad concern that's happening here. And among the and part of the sort of part of the concern, of course, is well, I mean, what's happening next year, right? We're coming up on the nation's 250th birthday. So I think that this has maybe sort of even taken caught people's attention even more. So let's see. I'll say something else too about the report, and this was a little bit of a harder kind of idea to communicate. It's that civics a common purpose because we've gone so long without having sort of agreement on sort of what can and can't be taught. That has kind of trickled down into sort of the broad sort of idea of what is the purpose of civics education, right? So when you talk to teachers who are teaching civics and you ask them sort of what is it that you're emphasizing in class, you're going to get answers that are all over the map. For example, a recent survey that sort of played into ours found that there's only about 32% of teachers that were surveyed think that sort of like basic factual knowledge in civics is essential. And that's been dropping, right? And so you're getting a rise in sort of this other sort of ideas about what civics education should be, the development of global citizens or promoting critical and independent thinking. And all of these things may be important, but I guess what I'm sort of getting at is that beyond just knowing what to teach and how to teach it, there's become sort of an erosion of the basic sort of idea and purpose of a civics education in this country that might be sort of unifying. And that's continuing to happen as teachers understandably are sort of trying to figure out their own purposes for civics education in an environment that is so sort of confusing. Yep, go ahead, Monica.
Hi, everyone. Liam, in regards to what you were saying, I was actually thinking in the study, I haven't read it yet, but does it cover at some point also like based on the findings, like what the impact of not teaching civic has like in the long term in terms of like us as a society? And again, going back to like, you know, if we don't learn how to have those dialogues and those discussions at an early age, the impact that it has later in the future for us, just politically and just everything that's happening in the nation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great question, Monica. Yeah, and we referenced that, especially in our prior report about when and why did America stop teaching civics. I think honestly, we have quote underinvested in civics, and I don't just mean money. I mean underinvested just in all senses of that term since, as we were talking about, since the 1960s, really. There's been some ebbs and flows, but by and large, civics has been pushed to the sort of back burner since the 60s. Well, I think we're starting to see the consequences of that today. If you look at surveys of young people today, Gen Z, I would encourage you guys to do some digging into this because some of it is kind of shocking. If you look at surveys of Gen Z, um, huge numbers, huge percentages of Gen Z are very take it or leave it on democracy. Well, we could have a kind of government we could have an authoritarian government, we could have something else. They don't really understand or care. It is stunning, and I think that that is just the result, as we were talking about, of an underinvestment in this. They don't know the story of our country. They don't know why it is that they have the freedoms that they have today. They don't realize that those freedoms are abnormal in the history of humankind, and that our country is in fact a giant experiment, and experiments don't always have to continue working. So. Great question. But yes, and there's been some other really interesting work on this. Um, the work of a guy named Robert Putnam. He's a very famous sociologist who was at Harvard University. And back in the 1990s, Dr. Putnam started to observe a major decline in membership in clubs. And that's clubs like broadly speaking. It used to be, as we were talking about back in the 50s, that, it was totally common for you to be as an adult, by the way, not a student, for you as an adult to be the member of two or three or four different organizations, and one day Dr. Putnam's wife came home and she said, do you see they can't even get enough people to join the PTA? He starts looking at this, and these indicators are going throughout our society. Membership in clubs is dropping off. The amount of time you get together with people to have dinner parties is dropping off. All of these different indicators. And why am I bringing this up? Like, what does this have to do with civics? Well, it turns out that this is civics. When you are part of a club or an organization, you're learning to interact with people who oftentimes are different than you. I mean, these clubs did not used to be segregated by income level or race or things like that. These organizations, unions, things like that used to bring together all types of people. And within those organizations, you'd have meetings, right? You'd learn how to speak in front of people. You'd learn how to disagree without having everyone in the room hate you, right? This was, if you look at the history of the United States and you look at sort of some of the great sort of things that have happened, civil rights, for example, clubs started it. And so back in the 90s, when everything was great and it was Bill Clinton and the economy was going great and we felt great about America, Dr. Putnam started saying, watch out in the next decades, because what we're seeing here is a breakdown in the civic structure. So really good question, Monica. But I would tell everybody to check out the work of Dr. Putnam. And if you don't want to read his books, there's a Netflix documentary all about him called that you can watch called Join or Die. And we actually did a webcast with the two directors of that Netflix documentary, but I'd highly recommend it. Great question, Monica. All right. Anyone else have anything we want to talk about? I don't want to keep us here if this conversation is kind of we've already been going for about 30 minutes. You're welcome, Monica. Great question. Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
I did want to ask, is there any programs that you know of that are in discussion or actually in practice where civics can be taught via experiential programs such as the Model United Nations, where students can actually experience it themselves, the legislative process?
Well, funny you should ask, Chris. We have a program like that. We have a few different civics programs, but the most experiential that would be like what you're talking about is our Camp O'Connor. And we do that every summer. You guys can check that out on our website. Some of you, you may have children who are eligible. I'd encourage you to look at this. But we bring students from all over the country. They're middle school students. We bring them from all over the country to Phoenix for a week. We call it like our civics boot camp. And every day, in addition to getting civics instruction from really great civics teachers that we have in the sort of Phoenix metro area, these students take a field trip. They go to the legislature, where they go down on the floor of the House and they meet with leadership. They go to the executive tower. They meet the governor. They actually go to the Maricopa County, the voting center, which some of you may have seen on CNN a few years ago. It's always on CNN because Maricopa County, as you guys know, is a big swing district and is also, I think, the second largest voting district in the country after LA. But they go there and they see how the ballots are tabulated. And all throughout this week, they're also running a political campaign. They get divided up into groups and they pick sort of their candidate for president. And everybody has a job. There's campaign managers. They put together a platform. And then on the last day, we hold a mock political convention where they nominate a candidate for the Stars and Stripes party. And, we have parents and families come and everything. And then, the mayor of Phoenix is usually there to shake everyone's hand. And there's a balloon drop. But to your point, yes, they get to experience civics. And as we were talking about earlier, that makes the instruction that they get, the facts, so to speak, so much more relevant. And these kids at the end, who on the first day, they're kind of, when we sing the Star Spangled Banner, I mean, gosh, they're like doing this. By the end of the day, by the end of the week, they're belting it out because they understand it. We tell them what it means. What are these words we're saying? What happened? What is this? What are we even talking about? They don't know. So we tell them. And then they're like, oh, that's cool. I like that. It's not super hard, but yeah, so I checked that out, and there's lots of other organizations that are trying to do this. The problem, of course, Chris, is that we can only do so much, and even though we're expanding as much as we can, the O'Connor Institute, we can only have so many kids, in the summer, right? We want to see this happening at schools throughout the country. And in order for that to happen, we've got to find a way to really kind of support the teachers, get them the preparation that they need, the guidance and the support. All right, Megan's in the chat. The summer program sounds amazing. To your point about Bob Putnam's work, local organizations, clubs, and governments are wonderful opportunities for students to experience civic life and have a real impact in their own communities. Agreed, 100%. Yep. So a lot of the learning in civics, happens outside the classroom. For sure. Elizabeth is in the chat. Without civics, Elizabeth's got a lot of questions. It's great. Thanks, Elizabeth. Without civics, how can younger generations know or have the tools to be effective? How to run for office, how to contact their representatives, where to register to vote, and so on. Is society depriving citizens of their right to civic knowledge and empowerment? I think that is a great question from Elizabeth, who always asks good questions in the chat. And I think that's true. I think we should think of it that way, that civics education is something that we as a society owe to younger people, for sure. We owe them math too. Don't get me wrong. I like math, sort of. But, civics is important. Sean, great. What are recommendations for adult-focused civics education? Are there programs that tend to effectively promote greater civic engagement? Great question, Sean. We have at the O'Connor Institute, we have a sort of Civics 101 sort of program that we offer for adults. It's through this sort of community app that we've developed. So you can join it. It's an app on your phone. And among the sort of offerings, there are sort of daily quizzes where you can test your civics knowledge, and it sort of gives you sort of the explanation behind what's going on. There's lessons. They're very short, micro lessons. They're like 10 minutes or less, where you can bone up on stuff that maybe you feel that you could use a refresher on. And they're great lessons. They're videos. They're interactive. It's all here on your phone. That was my daughter on my background. And yeah, but there are other resources as well. But I would say start there, because we're trying to do that. I think sometimes adults come to us, especially at Camp O'Connor. We get parents and grandparents coming to us and they say, after this week, my kid knows more about civics than I do, What do you anything for me? And so we do. We're trying to do that, and we're trying to do more of that. Great question, Sean. Question from Nancy in the chat. In addition to the resources through Civics for Life, like Camp O'Connor, the Center for Civic Education sponsors We the People and Project Citizen, which are very interactive programs for students. Thanks, Nancy. We've got Hanada in the chat. High schools used to have a civic program called We the People. My daughter participated back in 2014-15 in Arizona. Do you know if that is still well and alive and in other states as well? I don't actually know that off the top of my head, Hanada. Maybe somebody else can put in the chat if they do know that, if we have any other people from Arizona who've joined. Not sure. Great question, Hanada. A lot of good questions from Hanada, Nancy, Sean, Elizabeth. Okay. Well, like I said, it's about 10:40, and I think this has been good. Thank you so much for the great questions. I hope you will go and read the report. And one thing I'll say too is if you want to forward that report on to people who you think might benefit from it. We had a question about how you support teachers. Well, maybe passing that report along to, school and district leaders, to legislative representatives could go some way into sort of showing sort of the starkness of this sort of need. Because again, if you go to the report, you'll see the teachers were not ambivalent. We're talking like 80% of teachers saying help. So, yeah. And then finally, thank you. These are some of our really generous supporters who make programs like this possible. But thank you all for coming. We'll have more of these public squares and on different topics. And so, yeah, really enjoy this. So thanks.